So this is what I would call the privacy trap. We seem to have got ourselves into a scenario where the modern mind thinks that wealth is symbolised by imprisoning itself. I think that this is a mindset, and it's a circular mindset, which is very dangerous to the fabric of Britain. I don't mean dangerous in, you know, a getting all excited kind of way, but I think it's one of the contributory factors to the destabilisation of English culture, or even British culture. But how did we end up here? What's going on? Why is there a public backlash to the concept of gated communities? Why don't they work in the UK? I don't mean work as in function, I mean work as in why they just generally despised by a majority of people. So to answer that, of course, we have to go back in time. Oh, we're going quite a long way back in time here, aren't we? We're going right back to pre-industrialisation. This is what an English village looks like before industrialisation, or during industrialisation, but just not in a city. So we've got here the general populace. Got here the manor house. This is the common land in the middle. Got some squatters on there. Squatters didn't have the bad reputation that they do today back then. I'll go into that in a different video. But today we're concentrating on these strips of land here. These strips of land with A's in them, they're arable fields. And the A represents somebody who rents those off the Crown. And so it'd probably be somebody in one of these houses in the middle here. A lot of the people in the houses here will own separate strips. And these strips of land, they could have crops or be fallow or have livestock on them. Each field separated by these yellow markers here, the footways, they would all produce the same crop in agreement by everybody. The owner A would own these bits or profit from these bits. And over time, gradually, they did indeed split all these strips into individual strips so that each individual could plant a different crop and manage their land in different ways. But the main thing we're going to get from this, looking at this picture, is the look of it. The strips, the concept of the strip and ownership of a strip. Now, if we're going to expand the village, i.e. put more people in with more houses, it's not too difficult to imagine that if you split all of these strips in two, like a line through the middle, a horizontal line in the middle of all the strips, and then put one house at each end, you kind of have what is essentially a modern village, a modern estate. And this is essentially what happened when people started building ethical housing estates in the Victorian era. So with industrialisation, all these people started flooding to the city. So in a city, you don't get a patch of land commonly. Cities aren't really known for their patches of land. So in a lot of cities, you'll find these things called allotments. And that's where a green space is being given over. So each individual, again, can have a strip, and a rectangular strip of land to do their veg or flower or chicken or whatever farming. And you'll see here, this is a very nice one, lots of variety here. So people living in a flat, for example, can still have access to growing fruit and veg and all that kind of, have their own patch of land. But not all communities were quite as nice as that. Let's have a look at this this traditional Yorkshire mill. This picture obviously wasn't taken in 1864 as there were motor cars in it. But the houses are still pretty much set out as they were when they were built in 1864. The rich industrialists who had the factories, they needed to put their workers near to their factory because mobility wasn't very great back then. And they had enough money to build a housing estate, so they built these housing estates for the workers near to the factory. And you'll see here for this mill, this particular factory owners, He's just packed them in like battery chickens, hasn't he? Each property has no frontage, straight onto the pathway, and there's nothing in the back there between the houses. There's no real gardens or anything. It's just a yard. Poor lighting, and it's a roof, somewhere to lay your head. Probably got a fireplace, a bit of heat. But generally speaking, it wasn't an idyllic way for a human being to live. It was a very depressing environment. So this was noticed at the time by a lot of people, and the good people of society. I'm not saying this bloke was a bad bloke who did this particular estate, but those who had a mindset for the improvement of civilization beyond profit. There was an upswell of opinion right from the top to the bottom, and you'll see this even with Prince Charles today, that housing estates should be a bit more humane, a bit more in keeping with what an English person or what a British person should expect from their living conditions. Moving on to here, we're up to 1890 now. This is an open edition journal about Port Sunlight, an architectural and social essay. Now, Port Sunlight is a village that used to be in Cheshire, now it's in Merseyside, but essentially it was Cheshire when it was built, by Mr. Lever. And yes, it is that Mr. Lever from Unilever, a name you should recognise because it's one of those global multinational companies that have a hand in every pie nowadays. Well, this is the original Mr. Lever from 1890. And he built Port Sunlight for his workers to be next to his new soap factory. But he did it in the way that the forward-thinking, progressive, Victorian billionaire equivalent wanted it, and to be in keeping with historical and cultural norms. So 10 to 12 houses to the acre is the maximum that ought to be allowed. Houses should be built a minimum of 15 feet from the roadway. Every house should have space available in the rear for a vegetable garden. Open spaces for recreation should be laid out at frequent and convenient centres. And the purpose of these gardens? Lever also insists in his description on another important characteristic. The houses, in a process of self-sufficiency, were all to be provided with a vegetable garden. The buildings themselves, far from the typical alignments of working class towns, were low, and their layout gives the impression of space and freedom. They also testified to a search for individualisation that will, among other things, make Port Sunlight original. And again, this is another thing you'll hear Prince Charles go on about a lot, that when people build new estates, they should try to make them more individualised. So here we go. The purpose of having a large rear garden was so that you could grow vegetables. You could move from the countryside, where you probably had a strip of land, and retain your lifestyle, now working for a soap factory, and all the benefits that having your own patch of land provide. And you'll also notice the little bit at the front of the house. You've got to have a little bit of frontage for the social niceness, to make everything look pretty and to make everything more sociable. So when you walk down to the shop or to work, you'll probably see other people in their garden clipping away at their hedge or pruning a rose or whatever it is, and you might say hello, or you might even have a brief chat or a gossip even, and that provides a sense of community. I've got a picture of Port Sunlight. I went to visit there myself once. So here we go. This is my favourite photo of Port Sunlight. Don't worry, all the houses don't have hearts on them. I just thought it was lovely that this particular row of houses had hearts on them. What makes it unique, as it was saying, is that all the rows of houses like this, they're all different. Some are like mock Tudor, some are modernist, and basically each row looks completely different. And you'll notice at the front here, they've got a large patch of front niceness out the front. Because this photo was taken in the modern era, everybody's just put grass out there now. Modern people just don't have the time for gardens anymore. Oh dear, what a shame. But at least this one has a nice little flower bed here. And They've at least tried to decorate the front with some little bits of flowers here. But generally speaking, traditionally out the front here you'd have your flower garden with maybe a small hedge or a small fence. When you're out there, that would be you socialising with other people in their gardens or walking down the street or whatever, while you're making it all look lovely and pretty. Now at the back there'd be a nice big garden, where at the beginning of the back garden would be like your patio or your sitting area, and you make that look nice with also a bit of flower beds and all that kind of thing. But then further back you would move into your vegetable garden, and then right at the back of the garden, at the furthest point of the garden, you'd have a compost heap that could also double as your little burning area where you could burn excess garden waste, or maybe a bit of cardboard from all your packets of soap or all your packets of cereal box, Kellogg's cornflakes or whatever. Anyway, trash, basically olden timey trash that wouldn't have been plastic in those days. And even up until very recently, really, up until about 20 or 30 years ago, the smell of somebody having a little bonfire in their back garden, and I do mean little, there were stipulations, was a very common smell. It'd not be unusual to have the waft burning floating around, but they're at the end of the garden, so they're as far away from people's habitations as possible. And if there's another row the other side, then theirs is at the back, so the two bonfires are right furthest away from any habitation. It was all very sensible and well thought out. And so here we see a typical Victorian housing estate. This one wasn't done by somebody as exciting as Mr. Lever, so you'll see there's a lot of similarity to houses. They didn't go in for the variety like Mr. Lever suggested or like Prince Charles suggests. But the general format is still the same. You'll notice here these strips of land out the back with the smallish frontage. This one here, for example, is a semi-detached house. On either side they both have the same length of garden out the back, with the little bit out here for their rubbish, and then at the front here for a bit of greenery. But of course, this being the modern era, down here you'll see people have converted the front into a car park. The lovely front gardens have gone and people just plonk cars on them now, because cars weren't invented when they thought about making these estates. And because people just don't have time anymore, you'll notice there's very few people actually using these back gardens as a vegetable patch. Maybe 1 in 100, I don't know. Now we have to have government schemes to try and encourage people to eat fruit and vegetables. People should be growing their own. For some reason it's just stopped. Look, it's right there. That's the whole point of it, and yet nobody does it. Anyway, so you can see here, right up to the present day, this is a 2020 housing estate proposal, and when they really want to get their housing estate approved, like it's not a given that they're going to get the approval for the housing estate, you'll notice they try and make, even today, the housing estate look as traditional as possible, with all these strips belonging to each property. Nice and spacious houses, each with their own long strip, lots of greenery, a bit out front, and it's still in that traditional mould. In the 1960s, the Labour government, which, as I've explained in a different video, might not be up yet, but as I explained in a different video, the Labour Party aren't too big on land and land ownership. That's something that they have always tried to get away from. So when Labour decided to start building properties for everybody in the cities, they decided to start building upwards, and you had these notorious tower blocks spring up all over the country. These ones here are the famous ones in Glasgow, of course, and they were deeply unpopular. We're one of the only countries in the world that doesn't really like the idea of living in tower blocks. We're quite unusual in that regard, and I suppose this video is explaining why. And yeah, they just didn't work out. They're visually ugly, and the people who tended to reside in them, they tended to put the worst of society in them. Not saying that everybody in there was bad, but when you're packing together the worst of society together like that, even the ones who would be rightly offended by me calling them the worst of society, even they're going to get affected by all this stuff around them, causing them grief. It was like a perfect storm, really, of ugliness. And so it wasn't too long in terms of human history that they're being demolished, as you can see, and the crowds are coming out to watch this magnificent event. Who would have thought that demolishing a building could draw so many people? And like, look at this. This is a wonderful historic moment for these people of Glasgow. It's like, oh my God, we finally fucking got rid of that absolute crap. There you go. So that experiment didn't really work. I mean, in London, you get some skyscrapers. They can look nice. They can be popular, and building high has come back into fashion of recent years. But when they tried it in the 60s, absolute disaster. And the main reason for that, as I say, was pretty much historical, cultural reasons. And here we go, in 1973, here we go, a government recommendation. This is still the recommendation, I believe. The government actually recommends how much garden a new property should have. If it's a high-rise or a multi-occupancy flat or whatever, then it also stipulates how big the communal garden should be, so that any property that gets built for human habitation should have green areas. That is so cultural, it's embedded in the government all the way down from the people to the government. It's something that it does well, really. And we move into the modern era, and unfortunately we've had a few generations that have wandered away from this historical culture. And they purchased a house that has the traditional front garden, which they're supposed to be making look nice for the wider community, for the social aspect. That's their almost duty, as it were, as a landowner and a property owner, whether they're renting or, if it was the landlord or if they own it, whichever person it is. They actually have a duty not to do this. These high hedges are actually not in keeping with the purpose of the property. You could say they're kind of being naughty, really, but this is the encroachment of the privacy virus, in that people are growing these hedges because they want privacy. They call them privacy hedges or privacy walls or whatever you want to call it. And it's a trap. It's not you getting privacy from the public, it's you telling the public to fuck off. It's excluding yourself from the public. It's backing away from the public. It's you being scared of the public. There's nothing positive about it. I mean, if you wanted privacy that bad, you just close your curtains, or get net curtains. Or there's hundreds of other ways that you can get privacy without essentially saying, oh fuck this, I'm just growing a big hedge. With this big hedge, it means that you don't have to bother with your garden, don't have to make it look nice. And very often you'll be walking down the street and these hedges are all growing all over the pavements, and the don't give a fuck levels are really off the charts. And it's the don't give a fuck levels that this is all about. It's like a big symbol of don't give a fuck. I have an extreme example of this here. You'll notice here that this person doesn't live on a busy road. The excuse for the hedges is not noise pollution. It's a low crime area, so it's not really for security. Even if it was a high crime area, I'm not entirely sure that having that hedge there is going to prevent an intrepid burglar from finding a way in. I mean, I can see a pretty easy way in from here. Not only is this particularly egregious in that there's a large hedge, this is actually trees. And this is a double bank of trees. You've got these trees at the front, they've been cut down recently. But there's a double bank, so the ones behind them are still massive. And these trees are the famous lilandis. Lilandis started to plague the country 20 or 30 years ago. And people planted them because they were quick growing, and they grow very big very quickly. They can grow the size of like 5 or 6 stories very quickly and very easily. Again, it was disgusting. There was public outcry. Anyone who planted land at lilandis was looked down upon, really. It was the person doing it was not a member of society, as it were. They were going against the wishes of society. The person who lived here, I don't think they live here anymore. I think they either died or went to a nursing home, and it was just a very small, very nervous man. He was probably very wealthy, might have inherited it, might have made the money, I don't know. But he was just one of those very skittish people. You meet them and they're like, ooh, 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 like a pigeon or something, you know. And I can't imagine why they would need this kind of physical rejection of society. It can't just be that they're scared. There must be more to their psychology than that. It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face, isn't it? All that sun being blocked from getting in, and all that space that could be something nice and pretty, and oh, it makes no sense to me at all, and it makes no sense to the British public. And so you don't see Leilandi much anymore. That fashion got booed out of existence. And now we have a modern housing estate. This is one that managed to pass the planning permission, probably because they were really desperate. I don't know. But you see these kinds of estates quite commonly now, and you look at it and you think, if I had the money to purchase one of these houses, because they're all fiendishly expensive, is that what I expect from a property? Where's the frontage? Where's the vegetable patch? Where's the space to have a little bonfire? And even this big house here, you think, oh, that's an expensive house. Look at that. That one's got the lion's share of a garden there. But they haven't really. They've probably got less than an old council house, less property than an old council, less land than an old council house. I don't know. That's an executive home, I suppose they would call it. And again, they're just not doing anything with their gardens. It's all just grass. They don't know why they've got a garden, you see. They know that they have a garden because they know a house should have a garden, but they don't really know what to do with it. They don't know why they've got it. They just make it green grass because they think that's easy, low time effort. They're somehow in keeping with the neighbourhood by doing that. I don't know. It makes no sense to me at all. You just look at it and it just looks grey, doesn't it? What kind of people are going to come out of this system? None of these people are going to grow up with that historical legacy of understanding of why they exist in their properties, what's the purpose of their properties, and how do they function in their society to be a normal citizen, as it were. You're going to be walking down to the shops and you're not going to meet anybody, you're not going to say hello to anybody. It's going to be like a ghost town, isn't it? If you walk anywhere, you're going to feel like a bit weird just walking around. The word soulless is bandied around a lot, and that's it. I mean, maybe one day these places will develop a soul, but to me that looks like the modern version of the old mill town. I need some people, they need a property, okay, I'll give them a property, dump down any old crap anywhere, there you go, you happy now? And that's job done. There's an element of a lack of desire to continue in the traditions of the country, and people wonder why the country loses shape, loses personality, and why things seem to be declining. Maybe if they're not factually, they can seem to be declining because you can walk around in this new village that you spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on your new property for, and you kind of don't feel like you're where you should be. There's something at the back of your mind. It's like, this isn't how I imagine the future. This isn't what I imagined for my future. And again, I've got a picture for this from a cultural point of view. What was it that made Miss Marple so popular? Why did she resonate with so many people? What is the cultural concept of Miss Marple here? And of course, here we are. She's in her garden. Nice properly sized hedge there where your upper body can peer over and have a gossip with those walking past. And she's doing a bit of gardening there. Very pretty garden, very precise. And of course she's discovering clues on how to solve the murder from just pottering about in her garden, being observant. And this goes into the whole social aspect of why these gardens are like this. When they made this particular Miss Marple, the one starring Joan Hickson in 1980, the reason this particular series resonates so strongly with fans and why it often gets regarded as the most accurate portrayal of Miss Marple, it's not because of the actor. It's not because of the writing or the directing, or well, it is, but not anything like that specifically. You know, it's the modern versions are good, they're enjoyable. But what it is, what makes this particular series so interesting, is that it's not only watching Miss Marple, it's watching a living history of that particular era and that particular mindset of the English-British citizen. In that everybody who made this programming, particularly Miss Marple, she was of the generation, this lady here, Joan Hickson, who lived in that era where the culture I'm talking about of the gardens and how you live in your property was everywhere. Everybody did it. I have two grandmothers who would have been the same age as this lady here, and one was poor in a council house and one was wealthy in a private residence, and they both functioned, they both operated their houses exactly the same. The front garden, very pretty, very fussy, lots of flowers and bedding plants and interesting shrubs and bushes, and nothing to prevent anybody who's walking past from having a good look in and, you know, seeing how the neighbour's progressing. Back in those days, another reason that this front garden thing existed was that if a front garden started becoming a bit rough looking, a bit tatty, it's not just that there was, you know, people would turn their noses up at it and treat those people like second-class citizens. It was because it might indicate that somebody in the house was unwell. And so if a garden has been unkempt for a certain period of time, you might have neighbours start coming round, knocking on the door and finding out if everything's all right and finding out if anybody needs a bit of help. But anyway, that's expanding a bit there. I'm trying to be a brief video, this. And so the reason this series is popular is because it's a social history. When they make the modern versions, like even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even current day, the people who star in it and the people who make it weren't alive in that time, and they don't understand all the nuances of how the culture operated at that time. And it's like an acted version of history rather than people who just did it naturally. Joan Hickson here wouldn't have been really acting when she's pottering about in the garden there. She doesn't need to think about anything because she's doing it all naturally. But a modern actress, she might have to have coaching. If somebody wanted to make this whole scene realistic, the lady might have to have coaching on what were the norms of that day and how should they behave in their garden and all that kind of thing. And it all becomes a bit more of a palaver. And on top of that, what kind of modern dramas and books and cultural products are people going to produce that have the same kind of universal popularity without the universal understanding of the culture they're in? So when they made this, when Agatha Christie wrote the Miss Marple, her favourite detective, why did it catch on so well? Why was it so popular? Why was it such a cultural superstar, as it were? And that's because it really fed into this cultural norm that like 90% of the people in the country had. It felt so familiar. It's people writing about what they know, as they say. Come back to this estate here, when people grow up from this estate here and they want to, you know, make dramas on telly or whatever the equivalent is, or write books or whatever the equivalent is in the future, when they want to be culturally creative, what kinds of things are they going to be creating? How can they know what their audience wants when they never meet their audience? They're not part of a social audience naturally. And so we come back to this, the gated community, and it typifies all of this. It has nothing to do with English or British society. Nothing. There's no historical precedence for this. It's projecting wealth as being something that should be separated from the public, as if the public is different from wealth. It's creating a horrible mindset. It's creating a cultural difference. A cultural difference that can't have any positive effects, and it's just laying the groundwork for people to grow up in abnormal conditions that will make everything they do in their life harder, because they don't know how to relate to people. That the whole purpose of it is not relating to people. Again, it's instead of having a big metal gate here, What they should have done was just have a big signpost on either side of the pavements here saying fuck off. That's basically what this says. The whole attitude of this is just fuck off. And so you have a backlash to it. And it's just the latest backlash of people trying to create stuff that isn't what is, if that makes sense. And it's not just being different, it's like, it's missing the whole point. It's the missing the point that's the big issue, or the biggest issue, I suppose. I'll just finish with this interesting property that has recently been built, and I've seen two or three of this design recently, and these aren't from housing estates. This is people building their houses individually. There's probably an architect somewhere that specialises in this design for individuals, and this is a really curious design because I don't know what to make of this myself. I don't know where this stands in the pantheon of the video I've just made. So I think it's a good way to end on some kind of speculation, something for people to speculate about here. Because we've got the correct front garden with the small hedge or fence, and they're probably going to make that all look very pretty, and that's all correct. Out the back, they've probably got a nice garden out there. But what they've done is they've built a wall right across. See the wall that goes right across there from this side of their property all the way to there, at the end of the nice little front garden. And it's like, why? What's that wall for? I don't understand what the purpose of the wall is there for. I feel sure, again, I feel sure if a burglar or a trespasser wanted to get into your back garden, there are ways and means, and a wall's not really, a wall isn't really that much of a deterrent in the modern age, really, as it never was. And so what's the point to protect this window here on this particular bit? I don't know. There's a door there. Why do you need a door through a wall when you don't even need the wall? I mean, this bit maybe to wall in your car. If you had a nice car, you might want to put that in a sort of like garage-like thing. But this bit here makes no sense at all to me, because it can't be just for privacy, because they've got a massive window here and a window here. Well, it's a massive downstairs window here, which just peers out. So anybody walking past is going to look right in there, aren't they? So maybe they just want this bit to be private. I don't know. It's a sort of halfway house of kind of getting it and kind of not getting it at the same time, if that makes sense. And as I say, I've seen quite a few of these, and I'd be interested to know what the architect's opinion on or reasoning for it is, really. Is it to try and appeal to people who like privacy, but at the same time appeal to people who like normalcy? I don't know. It's such a halfway house that it confuses me, and I'm intrigued by it, really. So what I class as the privacy trap, it's a mindset. As soon as you do this, as soon as you lock yourself behind a gate here, you're trapped away from the society that you're going to have to be a part of at some point, one way or the other. Well, mainly for your own benefit, yeah. Like, you need to know who you're selling to. You need to know who you're talking to, and I don't know, it makes no sense to me. Why would anybody trap themselves in a continuing cycle of paranoia? And how will these people ever live with basic things like trust? How does trust exist in these people's minds? How do they learn or earn trust? I say it's a self-trap. They're trapping themselves. It's the craziest thing.